I was sitting in my home office in Boulder, Colorado, when the lights flickered twice and died, plunging the entire neighborhood into darkness at 3 in the afternoon on a scorching July day. The air conditioning shut off immediately, and within minutes, I could feel the temperature starting to climb. This wasn't just an inconvenience. This was going to be a problem for a lot of people, especially considering the heat wave that had been baking the Front Range for the past week. My name is Isaac Hoffman, and I'm an electrical engineer who specializes in power grid solutions and backup systems. I've lived in the Sunset Ridge community for about 8 years now, ever since I landed a lucrative contract with several municipal power companies in the Denver metro area. The irony of an electrical engineer living in a neighborhood that loses power isn't lost on me, which is exactly why I invested heavily in backup systems. I grabbed my phone and checked the local utility company's app. As I suspected, the outage was widespread, affecting most of Boulder County. The estimated restoration time kept getting pushed back, first from 2 hours to 4, then from 4 to 8. I sighed and headed down to my basement where my pride and joy sat humming quietly, already having kicked in automatically. My generator system wasn't just some cheap portable unit you'd pick up at a hardware store. It was a commercial-grade Generac Guardian 50 kW standby generator that could power a small office building. I'd installed it myself 3 years ago, along with a sophisticated load management system and enough fuel capacity to run for days. But here's the thing that made my setup unique, something that most of my neighbors had no idea about. When I installed the system, I also designed and implemented what's called a microgrid, a small-scale power distribution network that could operate independently from the main grid. With the blessing of 8 of my closest neighbors who chipped in for the equipment and installation, I'd set up a system that could supply power to their homes during outages. We had a formal agreement. They paid me a monthly fee that covered maintenance and fuel costs, and in return, they never had to worry about losing power. It was a win-win situation that I'd carefully documented with contracts, permits, and approval from both the city and the utility company. The 9 houses on my block that were part of this microgrid included the Thompsons, an elderly couple on my left, the Ramirez family with 3 young kids, the Patels who ran a home-based medical equipment business, and several others. Conspicuously absent from this list was the house directly across the street from mine, a beige 2-story colonial occupied by Brenda Morrison, the president of our homeowners association. Brenda had made it crystal clear 3 years ago that she wanted nothing to do with my unsightly industrial equipment, and had actually tried to block my installation through the HOA. She'd sent me a certified letter claiming the generator violated some obscure covenant about exterior modifications. I'd hired a lawyer who quickly established that my generator, positioned behind a privacy fence and properly permitted by the city, was completely within my rights. The HOA covenants she cited didn't apply to functional utility equipment, especially when said equipment was barely visible from the street. She'd backed down then, but she never forgave me for it. For 3 years, she'd been looking for any excuse to fine me, cite me, or generally make my life difficult. My grass was always either too long or too short according to her monthly inspections. My trash cans were apparently visible from the street for 12 minutes longer than allowed one Tuesday morning. My holiday decorations were up 2 days past the covenant deadline. Every minor infraction came with a $50 fine and a condescending letter printed on HOA letterhead. I'd paid the fines when they were legitimate and fought the ones that weren't, which was most of them. It had become almost a game, except Brenda was the only one who seemed to enjoy playing. As I stood in my cool, well-lit basement listening to my generator purr like a contented cat, I checked the monitoring system on my tablet. All 8 connected houses were drawing power normally. The Patels were running high, probably their medical freezers and equipment. The Thompsons were moderate, likely just essentials. Everything was functioning exactly as designed. I headed back upstairs to make myself some lunch, grateful that my refrigerator was still running and I could actually cook something. I was halfway through making a sandwich when I heard the doorbell ring. I wasn't expecting anyone, and given that we were in the middle of a blackout, I was curious who would be visiting. I opened the door to find Brenda Morrison standing on my porch, and she looked furious. She was a woman in her mid-50s, with aggressively highlighted blonde hair cut into what I'd heard someone once describe as a "speak to the manager bob." She wore a white tennis outfit despite the fact that I'd never seen her actually play tennis, and she clutched her phone in one hand like a weapon. "Isaac," she said, not bothering with pleasantries, "I can hear your generator running. It's disturbing the peace of the neighborhood." I blinked at her. "Brenda, there's a blackout. Half of Boulder County is without power. I'm using my generator to keep my house running, which is exactly what it's designed for." "The noise is unacceptable," she insisted, her voice rising. "And I've been informed by several residents that you're supplying power to other houses. That's a commercial activity, which is strictly prohibited by our HOA covenants. You're running a business out of your home without approval." I took a deep breath, reminding myself to stay calm. "First, the generator meets all noise ordinances, as you well know from when you tried to block the installation. Second, I'm not running a business. I have a private power sharing agreement with several neighbors, all properly documented and approved by the city. We've been over this before, Brenda." "I'm calling an emergency HOA board meeting," she declared, "and I'm issuing you a citation for violation of community standards. The fine is $500, and if you don't shut down that generator immediately, it will increase to $1,000 per day." I actually laughed. I couldn't help it. "You want me to shut down my generator during a blackout? Are you serious?" "Completely serious. And it's not just your generator. I'm also citing you for the electrical cables running to other properties. Those are visible from the street and constitute an aesthetic violation." "Those cables are buried underground, Brenda. They're not visible from anywhere. I know they exist, which means they're affecting property values." This was getting ridiculous, even by Brenda's standards. "Look, I'm not shutting down my generator. I'm not paying your fake fine, and I'm definitely not disconnecting my neighbors during a heat wave. If you want to call a meeting, go ahead, but the answer will be the same as it was 3 years ago. I'm within my rights. Everything is legal and permitted, and your personal vendetta against me doesn't change that." Her face turned an alarming shade of red. "We'll see about that. I'm documenting everything, Isaac. Everything. Your days in this neighborhood are numbered." She spun on her heel and marched back across the street to her house, which I noticed was dark inside. No lights, no air conditioning, nothing. I felt a brief moment of sympathy for her, but it evaporated quickly. She'd had the opportunity to join the microgrid when I'd offered it to everyone on the block. She'd not only refused, but had actively tried to prevent it from happening. I closed the door and went back to my sandwich, assuming that would be the end of it for the day. I was wrong. Around 6 that evening, I went outside to check on the generator and make sure everything was running smoothly. The sun was still high and hot, and I could see several of my neighbors sitting on their porches or in their yards, grateful for the air conditioning that was keeping their homes livable. The Ramirez kids were actually playing in their front yard, and Maria Ramirez waved at me gratefully. "Isaac, you're a lifesaver," she called out. "It's supposed to hit 95 degrees today. I don't know what we'd do without your setup." I waved back. "That's what it's there for." Hopefully, the power will be back soon for everyone else. I walked around to the side of my house where the generator sat behind a tall privacy fence. I'd landscaped around it carefully, with sound-absorbing shrubs and plants that helped minimize any noise. The fence itself was made of high-quality cedar that matched the aesthetic of the neighborhood. You really couldn't see the generator from the street unless you deliberately walked into my side yard. I opened the gate and stopped dead in my tracks. The generator was still running, still functioning perfectly, but standing right next to it was Brenda Morrison. She was taking pictures of it with her phone from every angle, and she had a tape measure in her other hand. "What are you doing?" I demanded. She jumped, clearly not expecting me to appear. "I'm documenting HOA violations on association property." "This isn't association property. This is my property. You're trespassing." "I have the right as HOA president to inspect properties for covenant violations." "No, you don't. You have the right to observe violations that are visible from common areas or the street. You don't have the right to enter my fenced yard without permission. Leave now, or I'm calling the police." She glared at me but started moving toward the gate. "This is harassment, Isaac. I'm doing my job." "Your job doesn't include trespassing. Get out." She left, but I could see her taking more pictures as she walked away, photographing my fence, my house, anything she could point her phone at. I made a mental note to check my security cameras later and document this incident. I had a feeling I was going to need evidence of her behavior. The rest of the evening passed quietly. I checked in with my connected neighbors through our group chat, making sure everyone had what they needed. The Patels thanked me for the stable power, mentioning that they had temperature-sensitive medications that would have been ruined otherwise. Old Mr. Thompson sent a message saying his wife's oxygen concentrator was running perfectly and asking if there was anything he could do to help. I assured everyone that the system was designed for exactly this kind of situation and to just sit tight. The power came back on around midnight, much later than the utility company had estimated. I watched as lights flickered on across the neighborhood, including Brenda's house. My system automatically synchronized back with the main grid, and everything returned to normal. I went to bed thinking that would be the end of the drama. The next morning, I woke up to find an official-looking envelope stuck to my front door with tape. Inside was a notice from the HOA informing me that an emergency board meeting had been scheduled for that evening at 7, and my generator system was the primary topic of discussion. The notice also included a preliminary citation for multiple violations, including noise pollution, unauthorized commercial activity, aesthetic violations, and failure to obtain HOA approval for exterior modifications. The total fines listed came to $3,000. I called my lawyer, Richard Chen, who I'd worked with during the original generator installation. He listened to my summary of the situation and sighed heavily. "She's really going after you this time," he said, "but she doesn't have a leg to stand on. You have all the permits, all the approvals, and all the documentation. The question is whether you want to keep fighting her or if you'd rather just ignore it." "I want to show up at that meeting," I said. "I want this on the record. She's out of control and the rest of the board needs to see it." "Fair enough. I'll be there too. Forward me all the documentation we prepared 3 years ago, plus any records from yesterday's blackout, and I'll put together a response." I spent the day working from home, catching up on projects that had been delayed by the blackout. Around 3 in the afternoon, I decided to go outside and water my front lawn, which was looking a bit stressed from the heat. I was standing in my front yard with the hose when I noticed Brenda's silver Mercedes pull into her driveway. She got out, saw me, and immediately pulled out her phone to take pictures. I ignored her and continued watering. Then I noticed she was walking across the street toward me. "Isaac, your sprinkler system ran for 47 minutes last Tuesday," she announced without preamble. "The covenant specifies a maximum of 45 minutes per zone. That's a $50 fine." I turned to look at her. "Brenda, I don't have an automatic sprinkler system. I water by hand." She blinked, momentarily thrown off. "Well, someone reported water running at your property for 47 minutes. That was probably me, watering by hand, which isn't regulated by the covenants at all." She made a note on her phone. "I'll need to verify that. In the meantime, I expect to see you at tonight's meeting. 7 sharp. Don't be late. Wouldn't miss it." The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a small building near the neighborhood entrance that was used for HOA gatherings and the occasional resident event. When I arrived at 6:45 with Richard, there were already about 30 people there, which was unusual. Normal HOA meetings attracted maybe 8 people on a good day. I quickly realized that Brenda had been busy. She'd apparently sent out a neighborhood-wide email about the meeting, framing it as a discussion about illegal commercial activities and safety concerns in the community. Many of the attendees were people who didn't know me well and had been led to believe I was doing something dangerous or improper. The HOA board consisted of 5 members: Brenda as president, Todd Sanders as vice president, Michelle Garcia as treasurer, Frank Wu as secretary, and Patricia Henderson as a general board member. They sat at a table at the front of the room, and I noticed that Todd, Michelle, and Patricia all looked uncomfortable. Frank just looked tired, like he'd been through this before. Brenda called the meeting to order at exactly 7 and immediately launched into her prepared remarks. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," she began, her voice carrying that false sweetness that made my skin crawl. "We have a very serious matter to discuss tonight. As many of you know, one of our residents has installed commercial power generation equipment and is operating what amounts to a private utility company from his home. This violates multiple HOA covenants and potentially puts the entire neighborhood at risk." I raised my hand. "Point of order. I'd like to speak in my own defense." "You'll have your turn," Brenda said dismissively. "First, I want to present the evidence of violations." She pulled up a PowerPoint presentation on a portable projector, and for the next 15 minutes, she walked through a series of photographs and documents. Most of it was technically accurate but wildly misrepresented. Yes, I had a large generator. Yes, it was connected to other homes. But the way she described it made it sound like I was running an unlicensed power plant in a residential area. "Furthermore," she continued, "during yesterday's blackout, this generator ran continuously for 9 hours, producing noise pollution that disturbed the entire neighborhood. Multiple residents have complained about the sound." "Actually," Michelle interrupted, "I haven't received any noise complaints. Brenda, did someone file a formal complaint with you?" Brenda's jaw tightened. "I received verbal complaints from concerned residents." "Can you name them?" Michelle pressed. "That's not relevant right now. The point is that the noise ordinance was clearly violated." Richard stood up. "If I may, I'm Richard Chen, Mr. Hoffman's attorney. I'd like to address these allegations point by point, and I'd like to do so now before this goes any further." Brenda looked like she wanted to refuse, but Todd spoke up. "I think that's fair, Brenda. Let's hear the other side." Richard pulled out his own folder of documents and began distributing copies to the board members. What you have here is a complete record of permits, approvals, and legal documentation for Mr. Hoffman's generator system. You'll see permits from the City of Boulder, approval from Xcel Energy, documentation of compliance with all noise ordinances, and proof of proper electrical licensing for all work performed. You'll also see the original notification that was sent to this HOA board 3 years ago, along with the board's acknowledgement that the installation complied with all applicable covenants. That was a different board, Brenda interjected. Actually, Frank said, looking at the documents, I was on the board then too, so was Todd. We did approve this, Brenda. I remember the discussion. Brenda's face flushed. Well, we need to revisit that decision. The covenants clearly state that functional utility equipment, properly permitted and installed, is allowed, Richard interrupted, which is exactly what Mr. Hoffman has. Moreover, the noise measurements taken during the installation showed that the generator produces less sound at the property line than a typical air conditioning unit. It's fully compliant with Boulder's noise ordinance, which allows for up to 70 decibels during daytime hours. This unit produces 58 decibels at maximum load from 10 feet away and is barely audible from the street. One of the neighbors I didn't know well, a woman named Susan, raised her hand. But what about the safety issue? Is it safe to have something like that in a neighborhood? Excellent question, Richard said. The generator is a commercial-grade unit with multiple safety features including automatic shutdown, carbon monoxide detection, and regular maintenance schedules. It's actually safer than many portable generators people use during outages. It's also located behind a fence, properly ventilated, and installed according to manufacturer specifications and city code. Another neighbor spoke up, a man I recognized as living a few streets over. What about the commercial activity angle? Is he selling power to people? No, Richard said firmly. Mr. Hoffman has a private cost-sharing agreement with 8 neighboring households. They collectively invested in the equipment and pay monthly fees that cover fuel, maintenance, and wear and tear. This is no different than neighbors sharing the cost of a shared well or a private road maintenance agreement. It's not a commercial activity under any definition of the term. No profit is being made, and all agreements are between private parties. I could see Brenda's case falling apart in real time, but she wasn't giving up. What about the aesthetic impact? The cables running between properties are buried underground and not visible, Richard said. I have photographs showing the installation. There's no aesthetic impact whatsoever. Todd cleared his throat. Brenda, I'm not seeing a violation here. It seems like everything was done properly and legally. What exactly are you trying to accomplish? I'm trying to protect our property values and maintain community standards, she said, her voice rising. If we allow one person to install industrial equipment, where does it end? What's to stop someone from putting up a cell tower or a wind turbine? Well, the city zoning code would stop that, Michelle said dryly, along with about a dozen other regulations. But more to the point, we already approved ISAC's installation 3 years ago. Unless something has changed, I don't see grounds for revisiting this. Patricia nodded in agreement. I'm with Michelle. This seems like a personal issue rather than an actual covenant violation. Personal issue. Brenda's voice went shrill. I'm doing my job as HOA president. Someone has to maintain standards around here. By trespassing on Isaac's property yesterday, I said quietly, the room went silent. Brenda turned to stare at me. I did no such thing. You entered my fenced side yard without permission to photograph my generator. I have it on my security camera if you'd like me to show everyone. I was conducting an inspection, which you have no legal authority to do on private property without permission or notice, Richard said. That's trespassing, Miss Morrison, and if you do it again, we'll be filing charges. The meeting deteriorated from there. Brenda tried to rally support from the attendees, but most people seemed satisfied with Richard's explanations and the documentation he'd provided. Several of my connected neighbors spoke up, talking about how the power sharing system had helped them during the blackout. Maria Ramirez even got a bit emotional talking about keeping her kids safe and comfortable during the heat wave. By 8:30, the board voted 4-1 against taking any action regarding my generator system. Only Brenda voted in favor of enforcement. The meeting adjourned, and people filed out, many of them stopping to talk to me or to ask questions about how they might join the microgrid. I thought that would finally be the end of it. Once again, I was wrong. 3 days later, there was another power outage, this time caused by severe thunderstorms that rolled through Boulder County in the late afternoon. The Weather Service had issued warnings about high winds and hail, and the storms delivered on that promise. I watched from my window as the sky turned an ominous green-black, and the wind started whipping trees back and forth, like they were made of rubber. The power went out at around 5:30, right as the worst of the storm hit. My generator kicked in immediately, and I spent the next hour monitoring the system and checking in with my neighbors. The Patels reported a tree branch had hit their roof, but no major damage. The Ramirez family was huddled in their living room watching the storm through the windows, grateful for the lights and the distraction of television for their scared kids. The storm passed around 7, leaving behind scattered debris, puddles, and a neighborhood without power. The utility company estimated restoration would take until at least midnight, possibly longer depending on the extent of the damage. I was in my kitchen making dinner when I heard voices outside, loud and getting closer. I looked out the window and saw Brenda marching up my driveway with 2 men I didn't recognize. They were both wearing work clothes and boots, and one of them was carrying a large toolbox. I opened my front door before they could knock. "Can I help you?" "These gentlemen are licensed electricians," Brenda announced. "I've hired them to inspect your generator installation for code violations." I looked at the 2 men, who both looked uncomfortable. "Do you have permission from the homeowner to be here?" One of them, a middle-aged guy with gray hair, spoke up. "Madam, we explained to Miss Morrison that we can't just inspect someone's private property without their consent or a warrant." "I'm the HOA president," Brenda insisted. "I have authority. You don't," I said flatly. "Gentlemen, I appreciate that you're trying to do your job, but I didn't request an inspection, and I'm not consenting to one. My system was inspected and approved by the city when it was installed, and it's maintained according to manufacturer specifications." The gray-haired electrician nodded. "That's what I figured. Madam, we're going to go now. Mr. Hoffman is right, we can't do an inspection without his permission." He looked at Brenda. "We'll bill you for the trip charge, but we're not inspecting anything." They left, and Brenda turned her fury on me. "You're obstructing an HOA investigation. I'm protecting my property rights. Go home, Brenda." "I'll have that generator removed one way or another," she said, her voice shaking with rage. "You think you're so clever, don't you? Sitting here with your lights on while the rest of us suffer in the dark. It's not fair." And there it was, the real issue finally out in the open. She wasn't concerned about covenants or property values or community standards. She was angry that I had power and she didn't. She was jealous, plain and simple. "You had the chance to be part of this system," I said quietly. "I offered it to everyone on the block. You not only refused, but you tried to prevent anyone else from joining. That was your choice, Brenda. It's an eyesore and a nuisance. No, it's a functional solution to a real problem. And right now, it's keeping 8 families safe and comfortable during a blackout. If you have a problem with that, that's on you, not me. She stood there for a long moment, and I could see her mind working, trying to figure out her next move. Finally, she spun around and stalked back to her dark house. I watched her go, feeling a mix of frustration and pity. The frustration won out. I went back inside and tried to focus on other things, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something worse was coming. Brenda had moved past rational behavior and into the realm of obsession. That kind of fixation rarely ended well. The power came back on around 11 that night, and once again, my system transitioned smoothly back to grid power. I checked all the monitoring equipment, verified that everyone's systems were stable, and went to bed. I woke up the next morning to chaos. My phone was ringing, multiple alerts were going off, and when I grabbed it, I saw a string of increasingly frantic messages from my neighbors. The most recent was from Maria Ramirez. "Isaac, your generator is gone. Please tell me you moved it." I jumped out of bed and ran downstairs, not even bothering to get dressed properly. I went straight to the side yard and stopped in my tracks. The gate to the fence was open, hanging on one hinge like someone had forced it. And inside the fenced area, where my $50,000 generator had sat securely bolted to a concrete pad, there was nothing but empty space and some torn-up ground where the connections had been ripped out. My generator was gone. Someone had stolen it in the middle of the night. I immediately called the police, my hands shaking with a combination of rage and disbelief. While I waited for them to arrive, I checked my security cameras. I had 4 cameras covering different angles of my property, all recording to a local server with cloud backup. What I saw on the footage made my blood boil. At 2:30 in the morning, a white commercial van had pulled into my driveway with its lights off. 3 men got out, all wearing dark clothes and gloves. They went directly to my side yard, forced open the gate, and began disconnecting my generator. They knew what they were doing, working quickly and efficiently with professional tools. Within 40 minutes, they had the generator loaded onto a hand truck and were wheeling it to their van. But that wasn't the most damning part. At 2:28, 2 minutes before the van arrived, I could see Brenda Morrison standing in her front window, watching. And at 3:15, after the van left, my camera caught her walking across the street and standing in front of my house, staring at the spot where the generator had been. She stood there for almost 5 minutes before going back home. The police arrived at 7:15. 2 officers, one older and experienced looking, one younger and taking notes. I showed them the damage, the missing generator, and most importantly, the security footage. The older officer, whose nameplate reads Sergeant Martinez, watched the footage twice. When it got to the part showing Brenda, he paused the video and zoomed in. "You know this woman? That's Brenda Morrison. She lives across the street and she's the president of our homeowners association. She's been trying to get my generator removed for 3 years. And you have documentation of that." I pulled up emails, HOA letters, the records from the meeting a few days earlier, everything. I also showed him the footage of her bringing the electricians to my house uninvited and her trespassing in my yard to photograph the generator. Sergeant Martinez looked at his partner. "Get a statement from the neighbor. I want to know if she saw anything or if anyone else can confirm the timeline." He turned back to me. "Mr. Hoffman, I'm going to be honest with you. This looks like she either hired those men or knew they were coming. That's conspiracy to commit theft at minimum, possibly grand theft given the value of the equipment. Do you have receipts and documentation for the generator? I did. I had everything, purchase receipts, installation costs, permits, the whole paper trail. The total value came to just over $52,000. That puts this in felony territory, Martinez said. We're going to need to talk to Miss Morrison. We walked across the street together, and I felt a grim satisfaction as Martinez rang Brenda's doorbell. She answered after a moment, still in her bathrobe, and her expression went from annoyed to shocked when she saw the police. "Brenda Morrison?" Martinez asked. "Yes. I'm Sergeant Martinez with Boulder Police. We're investigating a theft that occurred last night at the property across the street." "May we come in and ask you some questions?" "A theft? I don't know anything about any theft." "Madam, we have security footage showing you outside at the time of the theft. We just need to ask a few questions." I could see her mind racing, trying to figure out what to say. I might have heard something, some noise. I looked outside but didn't see anything unusual. "At 2:30 in the morning," Martinez asked. "I'm a light sleeper. And at 3:15 you walked across the street to Mr. Hoffman's property. Why?" She glanced at me and I saw fear flicker across her face. "I wanted to check if everything was okay. I thought I heard something. But you didn't call the police." "I didn't think it was serious." Martinez pulled out his phone and showed her a screenshot from my security footage. "Miss Morrison, this appears to show you standing in front of the property for several minutes after a commercial van left the scene. Can you explain that?" I don't have to answer these questions without a lawyer." "That's absolutely your right, madam. But I should inform you that we're pursuing charges of grand theft and conspiracy. The stolen property is valued at over $50,000. That's a Class 3 felony in Colorado. If you have information that could help us recover the property, now would be the time to share it." Brenda's face had gone pale. "I didn't steal anything." "But you know who did, don't you?" I said, unable to keep quiet any longer. "You hired them or you arranged it somehow. Where's my generator, Brenda? I don't know what you're talking about." But her voice was shaking and she couldn't meet my eyes. Martinez handed her a card. "Miss Morrison, I strongly suggest you contact an attorney. We'll be in touch with more questions. In the meantime, don't leave town." We walked back to my house, and Martinez spent another hour documenting everything, taking photos, collecting evidence. He told me that they'd put out a bolo for the white van and would check local pawn shops and equipment dealers. He also said they'd be getting a warrant for Brenda's phone and financial records to see if she'd hired the thieves. "Between you and me," he said as he was leaving, "I've seen cases like this before. HOA presidents who think they have absolute authority and can do whatever they want. Usually it doesn't go this far, but when it does, it goes real bad real fast. She's in serious trouble if we can connect her to those men." After the police left, I had to deal with the immediate problem. 8 houses were now without backup power, including mine. The main grid was fine at the moment, but we were still in storm season and outages were common. I started making calls to generator suppliers, trying to find a replacement. The problem was that units like mine weren't just sitting on shelves. They had to be ordered, and installation would take weeks. I also had to call my insurance company, file a claim, and start the long process of documentation. The insurance agent I spoke with was sympathetic, but explained that there would be an investigation before they could pay out, especially given the value of the claim. My neighbors were understandably upset. I called a meeting at my house that evening, and all 8 households sent representatives. I explained what had happened, showed them the edited security footage that I could share, and assured them that I was doing everything possible to get a replacement installed as quickly as possible. "I can't believe Brenda would go this far," Maria Ramirez said, shaking her head. I knew she was difficult, but this is criminal. Do the police think they can get it back? Mr. Thompson asked. They're investigating, but honestly, I don't know. Professional thieves like that usually have buyers lined up already. The generator might already be out of state or even out of the country. What about Brenda? Mrs. Patel asked. Will she face charges? If they can prove she was involved, yes, but that might take time. We talked for another hour and I promised to keep everyone updated. The group agreed to continue paying their monthly fees to help cover the replacement cost, which I appreciated but told them wasn't necessary. We'd all signed contracts, and I'd honor those contracts regardless of this setback. Over the next few days, the investigation intensified. Sergeant Martinez kept me updated as much as he could. They'd traced the van through traffic cameras to a storage facility in Longmont, about 15 miles away. When they raided the facility, they found it empty, but security footage showed the van dropping off a large item wrapped in a tarp before leaving again. The breakthrough came when they checked Brenda's phone records. She'd made 3 calls to a number registered to a property services company the day before the theft. When police looked into the company, they found it was a shell corporation with ties to several individuals who had prior convictions for theft and burglary. One of those individuals had a girlfriend who was willing to talk in exchange for immunity. She confirmed that Brenda had contacted them, offered them $10,000 to remove and dispose of the generator, and provided them with details about my property, security cameras, and the best time to strike. 5 days after the theft, Sergeant Martinez showed up at my door with news. We arrested Brenda Morrison this morning on charges of conspiracy to commit theft, criminal mischief, and solicitation. She's being held on $200,000 bail. We also arrested 3 men involved in the actual theft, and we've located your generator. Relief flooded through me. Where was it? Warehouse in Denver. They were in the process of stripping it for parts when we hit the location. It's damaged, but it's recoverable. You'll need to have it inspected and probably repaired, but it's not a total loss. That's something, at least. What happens now? Brenda will be arraigned in a few days. The DA is taking this seriously given the premeditation and the value of the theft. She's looking at potential prison time if convicted. As for your generator, it'll be held as evidence for now, but once the case goes to trial, you should be able to get it back. How long will that take? Months, probably. The wheels of justice turn slowly, but in the meantime, your insurance should cover a rental or replacement. After Martinez left, I sat down and tried to process everything that had happened. In less than a week, a dispute over an HOA covenant had escalated to a felony theft charge and the HOA president facing prison time. It was surreal. The news spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. Within hours, everyone knew about Brenda's arrest. The reaction was mixed. Some people were shocked and sympathetic toward her, believing she'd gone too far but not deserving of criminal charges. Others, including most of my connected neighbors, were angry and wanted to see her prosecuted to the fullest extent. The HOA board held an emergency meeting and voted unanimously to remove Brenda as president and to temporarily suspend all HOA enforcement actions, pending a review of procedures and policies. Todd Sanders, the vice president, took over as interim president and immediately reached out to me to apologize on behalf of the board. "Isaac, I'm so sorry this happened," he said when he called me. "I knew Brenda had issues with you, but I never imagined she'd do something like this. The board wants you to know that we support you completely, and we'll be reviewing all the citations and fines she issued to you over the past 3 years. If any of them were improper, We'll be refunding your money with interest." "I appreciate that, Todd. Honestly, I just want to move forward and get my system back online. I've got 8 families depending on me." About that, several other residents have approached me asking about joining your power sharing arrangement. Would you be open to expanding it? Potentially, yes. Let me get the current system restored first, and then we can talk about expansion. My insurance company came through faster than I expected. They agreed to cover the cost of a temporary rental generator while my original unit was being held as evidence and repaired. The rental wasn't as powerful as my original system, but it was enough to keep the 8 connected homes running during outages. Getting the rental installed and connected took another week, during which we had 2 more brief power outages. I spent those outages fielding apologetic texts from my neighbors and reassuring them that we'd be back online soon. Finally, on a Tuesday morning, the rental generator was delivered and installed. It wasn't pretty, sitting on a temporary pad with portable fuel tanks, but it worked. I tested the system thoroughly, verified all the connections, and sent out a group message that we were back in business. That afternoon, as if on cue, another thunderstorm rolled through and knocked out power for 3 hours. My rental generator kicked in perfectly, and once again, my neighbors had lights, air conditioning, and peace of mind. Several of them texted me thank you messages that were almost embarrassingly grateful. Brenda's arraignment happened 2 weeks after her arrest. I attended as a witness and to provide a victim impact statement. The courtroom was small and depressingly bureaucratic, with fluorescent lights and worn furniture that had seen decades of use. Brenda appeared in an orange jumpsuit, looking diminished and scared. Her lawyer, an expensive-looking man in a 3-piece suit, argued for reduced bail and painted her as a woman who had made a terrible mistake due to stress and poor judgment. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Jennifer Walsh, countered that Brenda had engaged in deliberate, premeditated criminal activity and posed a flight risk given the severity of the charges. The judge, an older black woman with a no-nonsense demeanor, listened to both sides and then addressed Brenda directly. "Miss Morrison, you're charged with very serious crimes: conspiracy to commit theft, criminal mischief, solicitation of a felony. These are not minor infractions. Do you understand the gravity of your situation?" "Yes, Your Honor," Brenda said, her voice barely audible. "Bail will remain at $200,000. Your trial date is set for September 15th. Between now and then, you are not to have any contact with the victim or any witnesses. You are not to leave Boulder County without permission from this court. Do you understand?" "Yes, Your Honor." Brenda's family managed to post bail that afternoon. I learned later that she'd mortgaged her house to come up with the money. She was released with an ankle monitor and strict conditions, and I saw her return to her house that evening, escorted by her adult daughter who looked furious and embarrassed in equal measure. Life in the neighborhood settled into an uncomfortable new normal. Brenda stayed inside her house most of the time, presumably meeting with her lawyer and preparing for trial. The few times I saw her, she looked haggard and defeated. I didn't feel the satisfaction I'd expected. Mostly, I just felt tired. The HOA, under Todd's leadership, underwent a complete transformation. They hired a professional management company to handle day-to-day operations and implemented new policies that restricted the president's unilateral authority. They also commissioned a full review of all covenant enforcement actions from the past 5 years, looking for patterns of abuse or improper citations. That review turned up some interesting information. Brenda had issued over 300 citations in 3 years, far more than the previous president had issued in a decade. Many of those citations were improper or based on covenants that didn't actually exist. The board voted to refund all improper fines with interest, which ended up costing the HOA treasury over $30,000. My refund check was for $2,300, covering every fine Brenda had ever issued me. I donated half of it to a local charity and used the rest to buy better security cameras. Summer turned to fall, and the trial date approached. The DA's office kept me informed of developments. The 3 men who had actually stolen the generator all took plea deals in exchange for testifying against Brenda. The girlfriend who had initially talked to police provided a detailed statement about how Brenda had contacted them, what she'd promised, and what she'd wanted done with the generator. The evidence against Brenda was overwhelming. Security footage, phone records, testimony from multiple witnesses, financial records showing the $10,000 payment to the shell company. Her lawyer tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the DA wasn't budging. They wanted this case to go to trial as a message that this kind of behavior wouldn't be tolerated. The trial lasted 4 days. I testified on the first day, walking the jury through the history of my conflict with Brenda, the generator installation, her various attempts to have it removed, and finally the night of the theft. The defense attorney tried to paint me as the villain, suggesting that my generator was a nuisance and that Brenda had been driven to desperation by my refusal to compromise. It didn't work. The evidence was too clear, and Brenda's actions were too extreme to justify. On the 4th day, after less than 3 hours of deliberation, the jury came back with guilty verdicts on all charges. Sentencing happened 2 weeks later. I attended again, this time to deliver a victim impact statement that I'd spent days preparing. I talked about the violation of trust, the damage to the neighborhood community, and the financial and emotional cost of replacing equipment that had been stolen out of spite. I also talked about the 8 families who had been left without backup power and the stress that had caused, especially for the Patels and the Thompsons who had medical needs. The judge listened carefully, then delivered her sentence. "Miss Morrison, you held a position of trust in your community. You were supposed to help maintain and improve the neighborhood, not terrorize the people who lived there. Instead, you used your position to harass, intimidate, and ultimately to commit serious crimes against a neighbor whose only offense was exercising his legal rights. Your actions show a pattern of escalating behavior that culminated in a premeditated felony. I'm sentencing you to 4 years in the Colorado Department of Corrections, with credit for time served. You'll also be required to pay full restitution to Mr. Hoffman in the amount of $68,000, covering the cost of replacement, repairs, and associated expenses. Additionally, you are permanently banned from serving in any HOA leadership position in the state of Colorado." Brenda broke down crying as the bailiff led her away. Her daughter, sitting in the gallery, looked at me with pure hatred. I understood. From her perspective, I destroyed her mother's life. From my perspective, her mother had tried to destroy mine and had faced the consequences. My generator, repaired and restored, was returned to me in early November. The repairs had cost almost $12,000, covered by the restitution order and my insurance. I had it reinstalled on the same pad, behind the same fence, with upgraded security features including motion-activated lights and additional cameras. The first time I fired it up after the repairs, all 8 of my neighbors came out to watch and applaud. It was a little embarrassing but also touching. These were people I'd been helping for years, and now they were showing their appreciation in a way that felt genuine and heartfelt. To Isaac and his magical power box, Maria Ramirez said, raising a glass of wine in an impromptu toast. May it run forever, and may we never take it for granted. Hear, hear, Mr. Thompson added. Best investment we ever made. The neighborhood changed after Brenda's conviction. People were more willing to question authority, to speak up when something didn't seem right. The HOA became more transparent and more responsive. Todd Sanders did a good job as president, focusing on actual community improvement rather than petty enforcement. Several more families asked about joining the power sharing system, and after my generator was restored, I began the process of expanding the microgrid. By the following spring, I had 14 homes connected, and we'd formed a proper cooperative with formal bylaws and democratic governance. It wasn't just about backup power anymore. It was about community resilience and mutual support. Brenda's house sat empty for months after her sentencing. Her daughter eventually sold it to cover the restitution and legal fees. A young family bought it, a couple with 2 small kids and a friendly golden retriever. They introduced themselves to me within days of moving in and asked about the generator system. I welcomed them to the neighborhood and told them we had an opening in the cooperative if they were interested. They were. They joined immediately and became active participants in the community, attending meetings, helping with maintenance, and generally being the kind of neighbors everyone wants to have. I sometimes think about that night when Brenda stood in her window watching the thieves steal my generator. I wonder what she was thinking, whether she felt justified or whether some part of her knew she was crossing a line she couldn't uncross. I wonder if she thought she'd get away with it, or if she simply didn't care anymore. The thing about power, whether it's electrical power or the power of an HOA presidency, is that it's easy to abuse if you're not careful. Brenda let her position go to her head, let her personal grievances override her judgment, and ultimately let her worst impulses drive her to crime. It's a cautionary tale about what happens when petty authority meets unchecked resentment. As for me, I learned some valuable lessons too. I learned that documentation is everything. Every email, every receipt, every security camera recording mattered when it came time to prove what had happened. I learned that community support is crucial. Without my neighbors backing me up, the HOA dispute might have gone very differently. And I learned that sometimes the best revenge is simply living well and continuing to do the right thing even when someone is trying to tear you down. My generator still sits behind its cedar fence, humming quietly whenever the power goes out. It's connected to 14 homes now, soon to be 15. It's permitted, legal, properly maintained, and completely within my rights to operate. And every time it kicks in during a blackout, I think about Brenda sitting in her cell, powerless in every sense of the word, while the community she tried to control thrives without her. The irony isn't lost on me that she spent 3 years trying to take away my power, and in the end, she lost all of hers. Winter came again to Boulder, bringing with it the inevitable storms and outages. My expanded microgrid performed flawlessly, keeping 15 families warm and safe through blizzards and ice storms. We'd become more than just neighbors sharing a power source. We'd become a genuine community, looking out for each other, sharing resources, and proving that cooperation beats confrontation every time. I still drive past the county jail sometimes and wonder if Brenda has any regrets. I hope she does. I hope she's learned something from this experience, though I'm not optimistic. Some people never learn, never change, never accept that they might be wrong. But that's not my problem anymore. My problem now is deciding whether we can expand the microgrid to 20 houses, or if that's pushing the capacity of my system. It's a good problem to have, the kind of problem that comes from success rather than conflict. The generator hums in the background as I write this, keeping my house powered during yet another spring thunderstorm. Rain lashes against the windows, and I can hear the wind howling outside. Somewhere in the neighborhood, someone who isn't connected to my system is sitting in the dark, waiting for the utility company to restore power. Maybe they're wondering why they didn't join when they had the chance. I offered it to everyone. I tried to build something good, something that would help the whole community. Brenda fought me every step of the way, and look where it got her. Meanwhile, 15 families sleep soundly tonight, knowing that no matter what happens to the grid, they'll have power. They'll have heat in winter and air conditioning in summer. They'll have refrigeration for their food and their medicine. They'll have the simple comfort of lights in the darkness. That's what I built. That's what she tried to destroy. And in the end, only one of us succeeded. The storm passes, and the power comes back on. My system automatically synchronizes with the grid, and everything returns to normal. I check my monitoring equipment, verify that all 15 homes transitioned smoothly, and send a quick message to the group chat letting everyone know the outage is over. The responses come back quickly. Thank yous, appreciation, relief. Simple messages from people who know they can count on the system, can count on me, can count on each other. That's what community is supposed to be about. Not rules and regulations and petty enforcement, but mutual support and shared resources and genuine care for your neighbors. It took a blackout, a theft, and a criminal trial to teach me that lesson, but it was worth learning. My generator sits silent now, waiting for the next outage, the next storm, the next opportunity to prove its worth. And I sit here, grateful for the technology that makes it possible, the neighbors who made it worthwhile, and the justice system that protected us all when things went wrong. Brenda wanted to take away my power. Instead, she lost her freedom, her reputation, and her place in the community she claimed to serve. The generator she tried so hard to eliminate still runs, still serves, still proves every day that sometimes the right answer is cooperation rather than confrontation. I supply power to my entire block now, just like the title of this story suggests. 15 homes and counting, all connected, all protected, all part of something bigger than themselves. It's not about me being a hero or Brenda being a villain. It's about what happens when you build something useful versus when you try to tear something down out of spite. The choice was always hers. She could have joined us, could have been part of the solution, could have been a leader who brought people together rather than driving them apart. She chose differently, and she's paying the price. As for me, I'm just an electrical engineer who installed a generator and tried to help his neighbors. The fact that it turned into a 3-year battle culminating in a felony conviction says more about Brenda than it does about me. But it's over now. The generator runs, the community thrives, and justice was served. Sometimes that's the best ending you can ask for. The power flows, the lights stay on, and life goes on. And if there's one lesson to take away from all of this, it's simple. Don't steal your neighbor's generator, especially if he's the one supplying power to your entire block. Because karma, much like electricity, always finds a way to complete the circuit. The months following Brenda's sentencing brought a strange peace to the neighborhood that I hadn't realized was missing. The constant low-level tension that had defined life in Sunset Ridge for years simply evaporated. People stopped worrying about whether their grass was exactly 2.5 inches tall or whether their garbage cans were visible from the street for an extra 10 minutes. The HOA still existed, still enforced reasonable standards, but it no longer felt like living under surveillance. Todd Sanders proved to be an excellent president, approaching the role with common sense and actual concern for the community rather than a desire for petty authority. Under his leadership, the HOA implemented several positive changes: a community garden, a neighborhood watch program that actually focused on safety rather than covenant violations, and quarterly social events that brought people together. I found myself becoming more involved in neighborhood activities, serving on the planning committee for the community garden and helping organize a disaster preparedness workshop. My expertise in backup power systems made me a natural fit for the preparedness initiative, and several residents who weren't part of the microgrid came to me for advice on their own emergency systems. The cooperative I'd formed around the power-sharing arrangement grew in ways I hadn't anticipated. We started discussing other shared resources: a neighborhood tool library, a community composting system, even the possibility of solar panels and battery storage to supplement the generator. What had started as a practical solution to power outages had evolved into a model for sustainable, resilient community living. My original 8 neighbors became close friends through all of this. The Ramirez family invited me to their daughter's quinceañera. The Thompsons had me over for dinner regularly, with Mrs. Thompson insisting on feeding me because a man living alone doesn't eat properly. The Patels brought me into their Diwali celebrations, and I learned to appreciate properly made Indian food. These relationships, built on mutual support and shared resources, felt more valuable than any technology I'd installed. The generator was just equipment. The community we'd built around it was something much more important. By the time winter rolled around again, my life had settled into a comfortable rhythm. Work was going well. I'd picked up several new clients impressed by my microgrid implementation. The neighborhood was thriving. My generator system had gone through multiple storms and outages without a single failure. Everything felt stable and positive in a way it hadn't in years. Then I got a letter from the Colorado Department of Corrections. Brenda was up for a parole hearing. As the victim in her case, I had the right to attend and provide input on whether she should be released early. I struggled with how to respond. Part of me wanted nothing to do with it, wanted to let the system handle it and move on with my life. Another part felt obligated to participate, to ensure justice was served and to represent the harm she'd caused. I talked it over with Richard Chen, my attorney. He advised me to attend. "These hearings take victim impact seriously," he said. "Your presence and testimony could make a difference. Plus, you want to know if she's being released early. You deserve to know what's happening." So I found myself, on a cold February morning, driving to the women's correctional facility in Denver where Brenda was being held. The building was exactly as depressing as you'd imagine. Concrete walls, razor wire, guards with tired eyes who'd seen too much. The hearing room was small, with a panel of 3 parole board members sitting at a table facing Brenda, who sat with her lawyer. I was directed to a chair off to the side, close enough to be heard but separated from the proceedings. Brenda's daughter was there too, sitting in the back row, and she glared at me when I walked in. Brenda had changed. She'd lost weight and her hair had gone mostly gray. She wore the standard prison uniform and sat with her shoulders hunched, nothing like the aggressive, confident woman who used to march across the street to cite me for imaginary violations. She looked defeated, which I suppose was the point. The hearing began with Brenda's lawyer presenting her case. She'd been a model prisoner, he explained. She'd taken every rehabilitation program available, worked in the prison library, mentored younger inmates. She'd shown genuine remorse for her actions and had spent her time incarcerated reflecting on her behavior and its consequences. My client made terrible choices driven by stress and poor judgment, the lawyer said. But she's not a danger to society. She's a first-time offender who made a mistake and has paid dearly for it. She's lost her home, her position in the community, her reputation. She's served over a year of her sentence and has been a model of good behavior. Parole would allow her to continue her rehabilitation while contributing positively to society. Then it was my turn to speak. I prepared a statement, but standing there looking at this diminished woman who'd once made my life so difficult, I found myself ad-libbing. Brenda Morrison didn't just steal my generator, I began. She stole my sense of security in my own home. For 3 years she harassed me, targeted me, and made my life miserable because I installed equipment that was completely legal and properly permitted. When her legal methods didn't work, she hired criminals to commit a felony on her behalf. That's not a mistake driven by stress. That's a pattern of escalating behavior that culminated in a serious crime. I paused, looking at the parole board members. I'm not opposed to rehabilitation or second chances, but I am concerned that Brenda hasn't truly understood what she did wrong. Her actions weren't just against me. They were against the entire principle that people have rights that can't be violated just because someone doesn't like them. She abused a position of trust, weaponized her authority, and when that didn't work, she broke the law. That's not something that gets fixed in a year. Brenda's lawyer tried to interject, but the board chair held up a hand. Mr. Hoffman, are you saying you oppose parole? I thought about it carefully. I'm saying I don't believe enough time has passed for genuine change. I'm saying that release after serving less than a third of her sentence sends the wrong message about the seriousness of her crimes. And I'm saying that I, as the victim, don't feel comfortable with her being released back into the community where I live. The board members asked me a few more questions about the impact of the crime, the financial costs, the emotional toll. I answered honestly, explaining that while I'd recovered financially, the violation of trust and security was harder to heal. I also mentioned that Brenda's actions had affected 8 other families who'd been left without backup power and had worried about their medical equipment and their safety. Then Brenda herself was allowed to speak. She stood, her hands shaking slightly, and addressed the board. I take full responsibility for my actions, she said, her voice quiet but steady. I let my position as HOA president go to my head. I convinced myself that I was protecting the neighborhood, but really I was just indulging my own need for control. When Isaac installed his generator legally and properly, I should have accepted it. Instead, I made it personal. I escalated. And eventually, I crossed a line that should never be crossed. She glanced at me briefly, then looked away. I'm not asking Isaac to forgive me. I'm not even sure I can forgive myself. But I am asking for a chance to rebuild my life away from here, away from constant reminders of my worst mistakes. I've learned about myself in here, learned things I should have understood years ago. I've learned that authority is a responsibility, not a weapon. I've learned that being right and being kind are both important, and that being right doesn't excuse being cruel. It was a good speech, probably coached by her lawyer, but I found myself wondering if she meant it. Could someone really change that much in a year? Had prison actually taught her something, or had she just learned to say the right things? The parole board deliberated for about 20 minutes while we waited in the hallway. When they called us back in, the chair delivered their decision. Miss Morrison, we've reviewed your case carefully. Your institutional behavior has been exemplary, and you've clearly made efforts toward rehabilitation. However, given the serious nature of your crimes, the premeditation involved, and the victim's concerns, we're denying parole at this time. You'll be eligible for another hearing in 18 months. We encourage you to continue your positive behavior and your rehabilitation efforts." Brenda's face crumpled, but she nodded. Her lawyer looked disappointed but not surprised. As we filed out of the hearing room, Brenda's daughter caught up with me in the parking lot. "Are you happy now?" she demanded, tears running down her face. "You've destroyed her life. Wasn't that enough?" I stopped and turned to face her. "Your mother destroyed her own life when she chose to commit a crime. I'm sorry you're hurting. I'm sorry this happened, but I didn't do this to her. She did it to herself. She's not the monster you made her out to be. She's my mom. She made a mistake. She made a series of choices," I corrected gently. "And those choices had consequences. I'm not celebrating this. I'm not happy about any of it. But I'm also not going to apologize for protecting myself and my neighbors." She stared at me for a long moment, then walked away without another word. I stood in the cold parking lot, feeling drained and sad. There were no winners here, just different degrees of loss. I drove home in silence, thinking about everything that had happened. The parole hearing had dredged up emotions I thought I'd moved past. Anger at Brenda's actions, frustration at the situation, and surprisingly, pity for how far she'd fallen. When I got home, I found Maria Ramirez waiting on my front porch with a casserole dish. "I saw on the court website that the hearing was today," she said. "Thought you might need some comfort food and company." I invited her in, and we sat in my kitchen eating chicken enchiladas while I told her about the hearing. She listened without judgment, asking questions occasionally but mostly just being present. "You think she's changed?" Maria asked when I'd finished. "I don't know. Maybe. But change takes time, and I don't think a year is enough time for the kind of change she needs." "Do you regret speaking against parole?" "No. She needs to serve her sentence. She needs to understand that actions have consequences. If she gets out early, what does that teach anyone?" Maria nodded thoughtfully. "You did the right thing. It's not about revenge. It's about justice." That conversation helped more than I'd expected. Having someone validate my choice, someone who'd been affected by Brenda's actions too, made me feel less like the villain in her daughter's story and more like someone who'd simply stood up for what was right. Life continued. Spring came to Boulder, bringing warmer weather and the first signs of renewal. The community garden that the HOA had established started producing vegetables. The disaster preparedness program I'd helped design won recognition from the city. My microgrid cooperative expanded to 18 homes, pushing the limits of what my generator could handle. I started dating someone I'd met at a neighborhood event, a woman named Rachel, who worked as a veterinarian and had a sharp sense of humor. She'd heard about the generator saga and found the whole thing absurd in a way that made me laugh about it for the first time. "So you're the famous power man," she teased on our third date. "Defender of generators, enemy of HOA Karens everywhere." That's me. My superhero origin story involves permits and covenants. Could be worse. At least your superpower is useful. We were sitting on my back deck, watching the sunset paint the Flatirons pink and gold. My generator sat quietly behind its fence, a permanent fixture of the landscape now. It was hard to believe that this piece of equipment had caused so much trouble, had been the catalyst for such dramatic events. "Do you ever think about moving?" Rachel asked. "Getting away from all the memories?" "Sometimes. But this is my home. I built something good here. I'm not going to let Brenda's actions drive me away from that. That's admirably stubborn. I prefer principled." She laughed, and we moved on to other topics. But the question lingered in my mind. Should I move? Start fresh somewhere without the baggage? The answer, I realized, was no. Moving would feel like losing, like Brenda had won even from prison. And more importantly, I'd built genuine community here. I had friends, partnerships, a cooperative that was making a real difference in people's lives. That was worth more than a fresh start. 18 months later, I got another notification about a parole hearing. I debated whether to attend, but ultimately decided I needed to see it through. This time, the hearing felt different. Brenda had served almost 3 years now, well over half her sentence. Her lawyer made a stronger case, presenting evidence of her continued good behavior, completed education programs, and plans for reintegration. When it was my turn to speak, I stood up and surprised myself with what I said. 3 years ago, Brenda Morrison committed a serious crime against me and my neighbors. At her first parole hearing, I spoke against her release because I didn't believe she'd changed. I still believed she was the same person who'd harassed me for years and then hired criminals to steal my property. I paused, looking at Brenda. She looked even more different now, more at peace somehow. I can't know what's in her heart. I can't know if she's truly changed or if she's just gotten better at pretending. But I can say that she's served a significant portion of her sentence, and she deserves a chance to prove whether that change is real. I'm not opposed to parole this time, though I do ask that certain conditions be included. The board chair leaned forward. What conditions, Mr. Hoffman? That she not be allowed to live in Boulder County for the duration of her parole. That she have no contact with me or any of the other residents of Sunset Ridge. And that she be prohibited from serving in any HOA or similar organizational leadership role. The board members conferred briefly, then granted parole with the conditions I'd requested, plus mandatory counseling and regular check-ins with a parole officer. Brenda would be released in 30 days. As I left the hearing, Brenda's lawyer caught up with me. Mr. Hoffman, thank you for what you said in there. I know it wasn't easy. It was the right thing to do. I hope she makes the most of this chance. She will. She's genuinely changed. I've worked with a lot of inmates, and I can tell the difference between someone playing the game and someone who's actually done the work. She's done the work. I wanted to believe that. I really did, but I also knew that only time would tell. Brenda's actions after release would determine whether she'd truly learned from her mistakes, or whether this was just another chapter in the same story. I drove home feeling a complicated mix of emotions. Relief that the saga was finally ending, hope that Brenda could rebuild her life somewhere else, and lingering wariness that maybe this wasn't over after all. But when I pulled into my neighborhood and saw the houses I was connected to, saw the community we'd built together, I felt something stronger than all those complicated emotions. I felt pride. We'd created something resilient and good out of conflict and chaos. We'd proven that cooperation beats confrontation, that community matters more than rules, and that sometimes standing up for what's right means enduring a lot of difficulty. My generator sat behind its fence, ready for the next outage, the next storm, the next crisis. It was just a machine, but it represented something larger. The idea that we're stronger together, that we can weather any storm if we support each other, and that even in the darkest moments there can be light. Brenda had tried to take that away, tried to destroy what I'd built out of spite and jealousy. She'd failed. Not because I was stronger or smarter or better, but because the community rallied around something that worked, something that mattered, something that made all our lives better. That's the real story here. Not the theft or the trial or the dramatic confrontations, but the quiet triumph of people choosing to help each other. The generator was just the tool. The community was the real power all along. And that power, unlike electrical current, isn't something anyone can steal or shut down. It's built on trust, maintained by cooperation and strengthened by adversity. Brenda learned that lesson the hard way. I learned it too, though in a very different way. As I sit here now, writing this story with my lights on and my generator humming softly in the background, I'm grateful for all of it. The struggle, the victory, the community, even the difficult moments. They taught me what matters, what's worth fighting for, and what it means to truly be a neighbor. The power flows, the community thrives, and life goes on. And sometimes, that's the happiest ending you can ask for.